Be able to we'll just allow people just 1 minute so that we can kick off with the rest of the presentation. I know we already delayed people, so would like to do this as quickly as we can. So I'll give 1 minute for any other people to join, and then we'll start. Okay, I will kick off right now. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, where we are going to be listening to a few other colleagues who have kindly agreed to share their thoughts and their papers. We certainly would like to give them ample time. There are 3 papers that will be shared. The order has already been shared in our earlier in our link to this meeting. So we will just make sure that we follow that order. So as you know, for those who are joining for the first time, we've been running these meetings essentially to ensure that we have a good sense of what the different people who wrote abstracts are proposing to share in terms of their in terms of what they want to share, what they want to have as their topic. So we've done 2 so far, and I think we are excited by the variety things that of themes that are emerging, and that in itself is a very good thing. So today, I think what we want to do is to listen to also our colleague authors, and we hear about what their views are and how they can improve the documents and the working papers that we intend to get out of this process. So that is how we would like to proceed. Let me just do a quick check and see who is supposed to be starting. I think Ben Masiko Kahunga mentioned that he wasn't available this afternoon, and therefore I think the first spot will go to Esther Tuwende to share her paper. So Esther, over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Richard. I am so blessed this afternoon to be presenting my abstract to the colleagues. My name is Esther Tuwende. I work with Kampala University. I am a young academician and a researcher who is just building a career in the academia, in the academic world. I want to admit that I am very ready and willing to learn from your experience and the knowledge you people have. I am grateful for CBR for the opportunity given to me to be part of this great work. If all goes well, I think this will be my first ever academic paper to be published. And you can imagine how beautiful it is, how I value this opportunity given to me by the center. Thank you so much. I am handling youth and politics. I'm handling youth and politics, and the title, The Role of Youth in Uganda's Politics, highlighting the political engagement, the challenges, and opportunities in the 2026 elections. Maybe can I share the screen if possible? Let's see. All right. That is youth and politics. That's where my emphasis was, or my interest was. And the title is The Role of Youth in Uganda's Politics. I'll be highlighting the political engagements of the youth, their challenges and the opportunities that these forthcoming elections provide to the Ugandan youth. Okay, I'll begin with the introduction, and I say this section will present Uganda's demographic reality of what exactly the youth numbers are. According to the literature, we have the majority of the youth of the population are under the age of 30, and I'll give the statistical data regarding the youth employment, the literacy. I'll also give in this section the importance of the youth as a political and social force shaping Uganda's governance. And in this very unit, I'll justify why the 2026 elections may be a turning point and as a reason for this write-up. I'll have a background where I'll explore the historical context of the youth in politics. Like I'll start with the colonial rule when I was doing my research. I found out that including the Girl Guide movement was part of, I didn't know that it was part of youth movements. I was a Girl Guide when I was at school, and I did not take care, or I did not take note of what was the history. But through my research, the research gave me a surprise that Girl Guide was also among the early youth movements. In my background, I'll speak about the young Baganda associations that came in as a youth force. I'll also speak about the role of the youth in the 1990s, in the 1980s. As you're aware, when the NRA by then went into the bush, they used the youth, commonly known as the Kadogos. I'll be speaking about them in my background. And I also look at the early NRM mobilization youth movements. You are aware that when the NRM came in, the youths were one of the groups that were prioritized. So in my background, I'll be also speaking about them. And also the Uganda Young Democrats, the UID. You are very aware that most of these politicians, especially those in the opposition, many of them came from such groups of the early 1990s and 2000s. Okay, I'll go for my literature review. Here I'll look at the scholarly work in the African politics, maybe in other countries. I'll also, based on the Ugandan literature, talking about the role of the youth in the opposition versus the ruling NRM youth leagues. And you cannot speak about the youth without talking about the Bobi Wine's People Power movement. In the literature review, I'll mention the gaps that find there the limited focus of the projections for Uganda 2026 elections, policy implementation studies are still lacking, and many more. Methodology, this paper will be based on a qualitative combination of secondary data sourced from the academic journals, the policy reports, the NGO publications, government census data, media reports published between 2020 to 2024. And these sources will be analyzed thematically to identify the challenges, emerging partners, and the best practices relating to the youth political participation in Uganda. Interviews from youth leaders, party youth wings, and then I'll also look at the representatives from the Electoral Commission. Okay. This paper will present the youth political engagements in Uganda, the various ways where the youths are engaged, and I will look at the electoral participation. You are very aware that the youths have 5 seats reserved for them in Parliament. We shall be looking at those ones and how beneficial they have been to the youth, the Ugandan youth, and whether it is effective or not. We shall also look at how the youth are using the digital platforms, social media, to change or to protest against the state narratives or whatever they are not agreeing with. We shall look at the examples of, you remember the Free Bobi Wine and police brutality. We also had the social media attacks where the youths really came in to advocate for changes. I will speak about the youth institutions. We remember we have the National Youth Policy. We have the Youth Ministry, which is under the Gender we have, even in local governments, we have slots for the youth where they can engage themselves in politics. The grassroots politics, that's the local government councils, the youth wings in political parties. We shall be discussing those ones and how effective they have been. And then we have the civil society and the civic education where the youth can engage themselves and be equipped with the knowledge of politics. I would also suggest that my paper includes the success stories of those youths, the youths that have beaten all the odds and have achieved in life, despite the challenges, despite all the obstacles and hindrances. The youths some of them have come up, and I would, with your guidance, you let me know whether it's true or not, but I would prefer to include the success stories of those individual youths who emerged as transformative agents in politics and civic activism through individual achievements. And I would speak bring in the examples of our very own Honorable Anna Ebajwe-Deke, Honorable Sarah Babile-Kityo, Honorable Agnes, and of course, Bobby Wine and his NUP and the NUP party. Those are some of the success stories I was thinking about, and when I was doing my research, I came across them. Okay, the paper will present the challenges, limiting the youth participations, and including the economic barriers and financial exclusions. You are very aware the nomination fees are too high. In my introduction, I think I didn't give you my background, but I love politics and I am a politician. In 2026, I contested for one member of parliament. And when I talk of nomination fees being costly, being too high for an ordinary youth, I know what it means because I went through it all. When I tell you my story, you can even say, what? But this is the reality. The nominations are too high. By that time in 2016, I think we were paying 3 million. And let me tell you, for me to get the 3 million, I had to go for a loan. And yet I was a civil servant. I had just resigned. So such things will be included in my paper. And then I'll speak about the institutional and structural constraints. The youth are just given something like a token. Yes, we have the representatives in parliament, but it's something we need to look at whether they're effective or not. The NRM structures and the opposition parties, they all give youth some platforms to, like in the youth movements, youth forums, but many times these things are just as a tokenistic representation. Youths are left out, especially when it comes to decision making, when it comes to being on top of party leaderships. Look at what is happening. Recently, we had the NRM primaries, and you know what really happened. So I'll be speaking about those things in my paper: political repression and the risk environment. You're aware of the harassment. Youth are worried about the harassment, the arrests, the restrictions on assembly, and the intimidations of the youth leaders. These are some of the hindrances for the youth participation in politics. The legal and policy gaps: no legal guarantee of the youth inclusion in party leadership. Youth lots are limited and they are symbolic. Look at the neck of FDC, look at the SEC of NRM. When I look at the youth, actually we the youth, we come in when it's time for politics, when it's time for looking for votes, mobilizing fellow youths. That's when we manifest, that's when we come up and we are visible on the ground. But after this, we shall be no more. So such things really make some youths not to participate in politics. We have the generational gap. generational gap, dominating of politics by leaders above 60, this limit mentorship of the young leaders. We have witnessed that many of our people they don't want to give way for the youth. Everyone is saying this is reserved for me, this should be reserved for me. So that gap really, the youths are being left out. Information gap and civic education deficit. We have the rural youth who lacks access to timely and accurate electoral information. Thank God for the digital world. Some of them now have smartphones where they can access, but still they may not know how to use it and maybe how to use maybe how to detect the right information. So there are some challenges still under that. We have the culture and social norms, respect for all elders. I'll be speaking about this, how it has really affected the youth. Because they have to respect the elders, we don't have to context against them. Some positions are reserved for the elders. Of recently, you remember, if we were all watching the Right Honorable Rebecca Kadaga, when he was making her speech, was saying this one was reserved for Honorable Chigongo. Why not me? So such things, now where will I, as Esther, where will I come? If people are being reserved, if this one is saying, if you're reserving this one, I should also be reserved. Okay? So some of such things have really hindered the youth participation in Ugandan politics, including parties, political parties, by the way. If you look at their structures and where the youth are featuring, you look and say this, that I'm right of what I'm speaking about. Okay. The paper will also look at the opportunities or potentials, especially when it comes to 2026 elections. What do we have? Reality is we have the demographic power. Youths, we are the largest. We are the majority. So if we can use this effectively, we can make influence in the Ugandan politics. We have the innovation. I'll be speaking about this innovation, creative campaign strategies. Youths have all the platforms. They have the music, they have the art, they have the comedy, they have all sorts of communication where they can reach their, make their points known. All these are avenues where the youth can participate in this coming fourth elections. We are agents of accountability. We are pushing for transparency in election processes. Reform drivers, we are demanding for electoral reforms. I don't know whether it's too late or not, but nothing is possible. We still have some time to make things change. There is available technology and social media where the youth can use and make known of their challenges or of their requirements that may be needed. Peaceful cross-party youth dialogues. This one is already happening. Many of our NGOs and other platforms are giving the youths, especially from all parties, to come and have dialogues together. In this paper still, I'll have the recommendation section, and this section will present recommendations including we need to invest in water and civic education. I'll be speaking about that. Expand economic opportunities to reduce vulnerability and manipulation of the youth. Reform political parties structures to include more youth in decision making. Yes, we are there, but when it comes to decisions, we are many times left out. So we are saying there must be reforms in political party structure so that the youth can be visible. promote peaceful political participation and protect freedoms of expression. And when we talk of freedom of expression, including online, if I'm making my point online, you don't have to shut down the online space. So just like we protect, we also need to be protected online as the youth make their concerns known. Strengthening youth structures, it's one of the recommendations that will be featuring in my papers. Economic empowerment, the youth need really empowered. Many times we are given temporary jobs, especially nowadays. I mean, in this political season, you see many of the youth being employed. This one is this one, this. When politics is over, election is over, back to your house, you have no job. The other one was temporary. So we need to look at that and give something of long term. We have decentralization and local government reforms. This paper will be exploring that. Also, transparency, accountability mechanisms, and support digital and social media platforms. All these ones will be explored in this paper. In my conclusion section, I'll have a recap of the youth role in Uganda's political landscape and also emphasize the 2026 elections as a decisive moment for the youth to make their concerns. No, then we shall have the references and all the references will be acknowledged and I will use the AP style to. Thank you so much. I'm grateful.
Well, thank you very much, Esther, for sharing with us the outline of what you intend to work with. We are going to have a discussion, but before we get to the discussion, we are going to listen to the other two papers. But I want to encourage colleagues to make comments and separate those comments so that at the end of the day, we can give the authors specific comments to their papers. So can I now invite the next presenter to take the floor so that we can then move on from there. So welcome to our next presenter, Namansa Nantongo Proscovia, who will be speaking to us about 2026 election observers, foreign actors, and local actors. Over to you, Proscovia.
Good evening, everyone. Unfortunately, Miss Namasa won't be joining us. She sent in a message saying she's caught up somewhere. So we can move on to the next presenter, Miss Sylvia.
Okay, because I see she's signed in. So is she signed in or is this someone else under her signature?
She had sent a message that
Okay, so well, we will then move on to the next. If she's not yet back, she's not here, then I think that shouldn't delay us. We shall just move to the next. So the next is Saili. Is it there is Namansa? You said she's the one who is not here.
yes, then Miss Sylvia.
Is Saili or Sili Namwase on the call?
Yes.
Okay, so can we go ahead with you?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good evening, good afternoon, members.
Just one moment. Can we ask the last presenter, please? You can stop sharing your presentation. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Yes, so my name is Sylvie Namwase. And I'm requesting to share my screen.
That's fine. We will, I think that should be okay. We just have to have, okay.
Okay, I hope members can now see my screen.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, yes, I am called Sylvie Namwase, not Silly. I think there was a mistake in the email. There's a V after
Okay.
L. Yeah,
Apologies.
no worries. I'm a lecturer at the School of Law, Makerere University. And my proposed paper is titled The Militarization of Elections in Uganda, a critical analysis of the legal framework and implications for human rights. In this paper, I propose to use the critical legal studies approach or theoretical approach to discussing this problem or this issue. And essentially, the critical legal studies approach is a school of thought in law or in jurisprudence, which is the philosophy of law, that critiques law or is doubtful or ambivalent about law's pretense at being neutral or objective. And critical legal scholars approach the law with an analysis or a critique of the paradoxes and the ambiguities that they argue are deliberately left or embedded within the law, so that the law through those avenues can be used as a vehicle for maintaining political status quo. Political, economic, gender, and a whole range of hierarchies that have shaped and have been shaped by our societies. And so this is the approach that I use to say that the law, as it relates to the role of the military, the Ugandan military, in elections, is ambiguous. It is written with ambiguities, with paradoxes that serve as a means through which the incumbent and the existing regime can sustain its power or itself in power through violence that is unaccountable. And that, of course, results in a wide range of human rights violations, with the ultimate aim and result of them remaining, the incumbent remaining in power through, on the one hand, a process that is apparently democratic on the face of the law or the black letter law, but when in essence the actual dynamics or practices on the ground make it so that the result will almost often always be that the incumbent government will remain in power. So the paper is structured, I propose to structure it in 6 main sections. In the first section, I propose to look at the history of military involvement in Uganda's politics, and introduce a critical legal studies as a framework of legal analysis. In the second section, I propose to discuss a broad overview of Uganda's legal and political landscape as it relates to civil-military relations. In the third one, I propose to zoom in onto the actual electoral laws and the securitization and militarization of those laws. And as I zoom in on those laws, I will be analyzing or magnifying the paradoxes and ambiguities that exist within those laws that are critical to enabling the outcome that I earlier on talked about of the political incumbents remaining in power through violence. And Then in the fourth, I will analyze the key human rights violations that ensue from the legal processes that are crafted in such a way that they enable these exercise of violence through militarization and securitization. And then in the fifth, I propose to look at how other countries, other jurisdictions address the issue or the place of the military in their elections. And then I will conclude. And now in the extended abstract / outline that I shared, I already input a few details that I now propose to go back and expound upon per section. So in the first section, the discussion of the history of military involvement in Uganda's politics will go all the way back to the colonial period and examine and detail how the colonial project instrumentalized the so-called Uganda Rifles Army that were made up of Sudanese soldiers under British command. That were instrumental in pacifying communities within Uganda that resisted colonization. And through that pacification process, they were able to expand and consolidate colonial rule in Uganda, and thereby, of course, embedding themselves as critical to the political setup of this entity that is called Uganda today. Some examples that I explore here, Rwanda, is how this army was important in the defeat of Kabalega, who was one of those kings that put up some of the most formidable resistance to colonial rule, and also how they were instrumental in suppressing Mwanga's rebellion of 1897. Also further perpetuating themselves as critical in the place of politics. And then, of course, it will go into how the post-colonial governments, because of the political differences, really deep ideological and political differences that that this entity called Uganda was left with at flag independence, how the subsequent post-colonial governments found themselves often having to resolve those differences, those ideological differences through force, once again further centering the place of the military. And of course, this discussion will center on those ideological differences as they existed between the Kabaka of Uganda and Apollo Milton Obote, the first prime minister. They will, of course, center the 1966 crisis and the attack on the palace and how central the military was in effecting that attack. And central to the question on politics and law, it will also highlight the pigeonhole constitution and the circumstances under which it was basically the political structures or systems were basically coerced to accept this pigeonhole constitution with the very, very clear presence of the military. And then, of course, in that process, the narrative will hint at the evolution of Idi Amin and how he himself later on came to launch a coup against Obote, propelling himself into power, into ruling by military decree. But then how that whole process was also never really geared at democratization, and it was therefore very soon followed by another military intervention through the attack by Obote with the support of Tanzanian soldiers, ushering in Obote too. But that regime also never learned from the past, still continued weaponizing the army to address internal, first of all, internal party-based conflict and ethnic-based conflicts that eventually led to the coup by Basilio Okello and Tito Okello, and soon thereafter being so weakened in terms of democracy, the attack by Yoweri Museveni's NRA in 1986. And this section will then, of course, highlight the importance of the connection between the NRA under the command of President Yoweri Museveni as the current head of state, and also the commander-in-chief of the now modern, quote unquote, modern army, the Uganda People's Defense Forces, which then is well embedded in law under the UPDF Act, and of course within the framework of the Constitution. And in this, I will then introduce the element of critical legal theory, drawing upon Rebecca Tapp, scholars like Rebecca Tapp Scott and Ailey Tripp, who emphasized the nature of the regime under President Museveni as a hybrid regime, where on the one hand, you actually have the law and seemingly democratic institutions embedded in the law, and yet at the same time, you have a covert and overt systematic process and democratic process of militarization, authoritarianism, which is all pointing towards strengthening and entrenching the regime in power. Here under and the role of the military in terms of the political landscape highlights some events, and the political landscape, under Museveni's regime will highlight some critical events, such as, of course, the rise to power of Inspector Generals of Police, or the appointment of military Inspector Generals of Police, most prominent being General Kale Kaihura's tenure, where the Public Order Management Act, again, this is a tool of law that was introduced under heightened militarism. We shall also I'll also highlight the Black Mamba attack on the High Court and the judiciary in 2005, the violent suppression of walk-to-work protests in 2011 following the post-election period of that time, the attack on Parliament during the age limit debate, almost mirroring the 1966 Pigeonhole Constitution setup, the Buganda riots, the Rwenzururu Palace, among others. And this, and of course, the November election protests of 2020, where we had that interesting phenomena of stray bullets. And stray bullets that resulted in the death of over 50 people in a span of 2 days that have never been prosecuted. And of course, here I will not be discussing these in detail. I will just be, because space practically cannot allow it, but I'll be highlighting them as key events that show the role of the military in Uganda's political landscape, more so within the electoral process. Then under section, and that will then dovetail into how this dynamic that I've discussed under the section 1 on the history and the concept of hybridity. Of course, I will then also therein introduce critical legal studies, which I had already explained earlier, but I will introduce it properly under this section, where I will highlight some of the key critical legal scholars and the central tenets of this school of thought on how the law should be approached with ambivalence, and how the law is essentially a tool of political organizing and power. And having introduced that, I will go into then dovetail into section 2 of the paper, where I then now propose to show in Uganda's legal framework and policy and political landscape as it relates to the concept of civil-military relations. How does that play out? How is that understood within Uganda's legal and political landscape? What are civil-military relations generally? What does the law say? And essentially in this section, I'll be demonstrating that actually the legal framework itself obscures the dynamics or the actual scope or nature of civil-military relations in the country through ambiguity, while the political context. Okay, so I think I've received I'm seeing some comments in the section, in the comment section, but I don't know. Maybe let me first pick up my pace. I finish. Then I'll address them. In section 2, I will introduce the constitutional landscape, and that is where I will look at the roles of the UPDF and specifically highlight how under Article 209, for instance, particularly 209B, that says that the role, one of the functions of the UPDF is to cooperate with civilian authority in emergency situations and in cases of natural disasters, which is not defined. And then when we go into the UPDF Act, under the various sections, there is a framework for secondment and attachment of UPDF personnel to civilian institutions, but there's no actual statutory frameworks in which these secondments and attachments are to be done, and how they are to be managed, and even on what are the conditions that can trigger those secondments. And then I will also explore the concept of aid to the civil power under the UPDF Act, where it says that the civil authority can call upon the UPDF to support it, where it's of the opinion that a riot or a disturbance of the peace will likely to be beyond its power to control. I problematize the ambiguity of the terminology of a riot and disturbance of the peace, and how that is very subjective and mirrors the critical legal scholars' critique of law, because eventually whoever decides what is a disturbance of the peace in the Ugandan context would decide it in a manner that mirrors the political realities that I would have addressed earlier, among other things. Then I will skip to section 3, where, having introduced that broad landscape, I now zoom in on the actual electoral laws to identify further instances where within the law there is that embeddedness of militarism and militarization and securitization. I review the Electoral Commission Act, the Parliamentary Elections Act, the Political Parties and Organizations Act, the Presidential Elections, and the Presidential Elections Act. And the main thing that struck out that I will highlight in this section is the provisions within these various electoral laws that envisage that the different electoral officials can request the assistance of the Uganda Police Force or other persons to aid them in maintaining peace and good order. So again, the theme of, first of all, maintaining peace and good order, what does that mean? That in itself I will problematize. But also the introduction of the institution of the Uganda Police Force into the electoral process, whereas on the face of it would create a sense of a demilitarized electoral process. I do critique the nature of the institution itself as being militarized, highlighting, for instance, how the topmost structures, namely the IGPs and deputy IGPs, are in fact appointed by the president, who's also the commander-in-chief of the UPDF. Then I will, of course, highlight some very specific ones that stand out, for instance, in the roles of the electoral commissions and the Electoral Commission Act, that the Electoral Commission has powers to take steps to ensure that there are secure conditions necessary for the conduct of any election. So again, I problematize what exactly is the scope of that power to ensure secure conditions, because those are the reasons that are possibly drawn upon to insist on the deployment of SFC or ISO in the verification, for instance, of signatures or provision of security to the different contenders. And then another very important one is the purported provision within the laws, these laws, to ban arms and ammunition at polling stations. Yet at the same time, under subsequent sections, there is a possibility of deploying military if they are called upon by lawful authority to support the electoral process. So in as much as the law says they cannot be appointed as election constables, the same law says they can be called upon by lawful authorities to support. Another interesting one is the issue of security of the presidential contenders. In a number of these laws, the word language is ambiguous. For instance, at Section 23 of the Presidential Elections Act that says that the Commission shall ensure that the relevant organs of state provide during the entire campaign season the protection of each candidate and adequate security at all meetings of the candidate, and shall consult the candidate as to their security. I problematize relevant organs of the state. What are those? I problematize shall consult the candidate as to their security. The law doesn't say consult them on what exactly and to what end. Does this consultation mean that they can refuse this security that has been provided? So for instance, we've seen now that the SFC allegedly has been deployed to provide security to all of these contestants, and yet the same law, it seems in their understanding, allows them to provide for themselves security and reject state security. But the relevant electoral laws themselves do not exactly say this very clearly. Hence the ambiguity and the precarity on that issue. Under Section 4, I will discuss key human rights violations, drawing upon some empirical evidence on publicly reported cases. But I also think, space and time permitting, I will zoom into the question of the right to vote and how exactly militarization affects, or whether it affects the right to vote. Yes, and then in Section 5, I will look at examples from other regions. In particular, there is a 2010 study that was done on 6 West African nations, in the laws of 6 West African nations, about the place of security forces in the electoral laws, and I will draw quite a bit on that study. Most outstanding for me in this study is that almost all of these 6 countries prohibit the presence of the military during elections, and instead recognize the role of the police. And then also there was some indicators, for instance, in Benin and other countries, that closer to the election period, they normally come up with more specific sub-laws or subsidiary laws that are meant to critically fill those gaps that might enable or disrupt the electoral process. So they adapt sort of like a reactive or responsive approach to legislation as they go closer to the laws. There's also a unique practice in Togo, where the different political stakeholders, for instance, in 2006, signed a comprehensive political agreement. And one of the main aims of that was to set up a security force that was responsible for security and peace during the elections. And then I will conclude by encouraging a maintenance of an ambivalence to the law as far as the electoral laws are concerned, and instead encourage a critical approach to the law. In as much as I suggest law reform, I also am aware of the militarized nature of the legal reform institutions. Of course, the political advantage that the NRM also has in Parliament, and the risk of militarization that the judiciary is already exposed to. So I temper my recommendations by calling upon more civic education on this particular question of civil military relations in Uganda generally, but also in the context of elections specifically. And that should run alongside advocacy campaigns for a reform process that removes room for militarization and anchors the principle of subordination of the military to civilian authority, but while at the same time understanding that even the civilian authority itself operates under state capture or the shadow state. And so for that, we would need a more long-term democratization process if we are to really solve the issues pertaining to militarized electoral processes. And I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was quite articulate and very helpful to understand your perspectives and what you would love to write in that working paper. Certainly interesting perspectives. We will now find out if Proscovia is available now. Proscovia, are you available now? Okay, if Proscovia is not here, what I'll do is to open up the discussion and comments and reactions to the two papers. So colleagues, you have heard the presentation from Esther and from Slivia. So let's hear comments you would have for them to improve, to sharpen, to make their papers better. Fundamentally is to the idea for these seminars is fundamentally to make sure that we sharpen the papers and they are, you know, better and much for publication. So I open the floor. You can. I will ask my colleague Andrew to moderate this for me because I'm using a phone and I may not be able to see all the hands. But Andrew, over to you. Kindly moderate this session for me. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So I would like to democratically ask the team, because there's conflict of interest. I had raised my hand to ask a question. So I don't know if I should misuse the power vested in me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. I'll do the moderation, and please use your button to raise your hand, and I'll see it and then have you speak. If I may, I have two questions. One, yes, I see the hands, Habib, I'm coming to you. I have two questions. The first one is to Esther. Let's be sure it's the first presenter, the lady. I don't see her on the chat, the list of participants. Is she still with us? Hello, is the first presenter still?
Andrew, I'm not sure, but what I would suggest that you please go ahead and ask the question and make the comment. This is a recorded event, so we should be able to share this with her in case she's not here.
Okay, thank you for the guidance. Here it is. Why are youth a numerical majority, but discussed and treated as a minority in most public, scholarly, political, and other conversations? Again, why are youth a numerical majority, but discussed or treated as a minority in most public, political, or other forms of conversation? The second question goes to both presenters as well. That includes
Richard, Andrew, I
Yes.
lost you. I didn't get you well. I was off. Kindly help me repeat. Yes.
Why are young people in Uganda a numerical majority, but are discussed or treated as a minority in most political, scholarly, policy, and other conversations. What explains that, if I could say, what could explain that variation between these being the majority, but then we always, in my view, treat them as a minority or special category or some vulnerable group? What explains that? The second question is to both presenters, and it is grounded in me questioning certain assumptions that we have. And these assumptions are premised, in my view, on some of the literature that we rely on to use certain words. For example, words like political parties, words like elections, and words like civil-military relations. It's not a part, it's difficult for me to see how we can refer to what we have in Uganda today as a multi-party dispensation, or I dare say, to even say we have conscious citizens and therefore competent voters who know and can engage in this process in the way that it was intended for. And lastly, when it comes to things like civil-military relations, this is a concept that I have encountered. Sylvie might know better, but at least I have encountered it in my reading of Samuel P. Huntington, his instructive book on the military, on the same topic of civil-military relations. And in that book, you can see how militaries in other countries are institutions. Yes, they have evolved out of militias, of vigilantes, and so on, but they are at heart, they are currently institutions. When you talk about the Pentagon, it's clear what you are referring to. When you talk about the French military, it's clear what it is you're referring to, or to the South African National Defense Forces, or closer to home, the KDF, the Kenya Defense Forces. Uganda's situation doesn't, in my view, lend itself to the language of civil-military relations. So my question is, what does us importing words like those, citizens, political parties, elections, and civil-military relations, do to our research and the direction in which it leads? I ask this conscious of the fact that Sylvie has already said she's using a critical legal studies lens to interrogate these questions. Thank you very much. Habib, now I'll wear the hat of moderator and invite Habib to ask his question.
Thank you so much, moderator. Colleagues, we appreciate your presentations. They have been so fantastic and so much, inciting. I have already asked the question to Sliv. I think, she got it. Maybe she will respond on it. Without wasting time, then I will go to my question for Esther. Esther, very simple ethical one. I don't know, do you have a positionality in your study? Or probably you might need to think of that. Why am I saying so? In the presentation, a significant effort you put was more of some advocacy and activism in the study, and that made me to begin to think whether you can really consider your positionality in the study as a critical element of the study. Then the second one is relating to willingness of the youths to participate, and I think this is somehow someone has, Andrew, has touched it. How do we imagine it? We have a number of items here. One, is there any legal restriction of youths from participating in any elective position in the country. That's one. Two, how about if we look at this way, that there's an affirmative action given to the youths so that they are reinforced positions in all the constituencies at whether sub-county level or probably at that, or even to the national level. There are reinforced positions for the youths to participate. And then there's this big opportunity where youths also qualify to participate in any position of their wish. I don't know, I'm correct in that. What then affects their participation? Is this a structured process, or it is lack of will or lack of political activeness among the youths in Uganda, not to so actively engage in participation when elections come? You gave us examples of youths who successfully competed for positions which were not gazetted for.
Please speak into the microphone. Please speak into the microphone. We can barely hear you.
Oh, my microphone is in?
Now that's clear. That's clear.
Yes, I was saying you have given us examples of youths who successfully outcompeted those other age brackets in positions that have not been legally reinforced for the youths. So what then hinders others to do the same? Back to you, moderator.
Thank you very much. And I'll invite, yes?
Back to you,
Okay.
back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Habib. I'll now invite Arini Rugendo. You're welcome.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. I hope I'm being heard. I'm speaking in a lot because I'm in
Your voice is very low. Please speak up. Or if
can you
you're
hear
using
me?
earphones, switch to the main mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, sorry. I'm in the library at Makerere, so I might speak in a low tone, but I'll be very fast.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sylvia and Esther, for your insightful journey that I have learned a lot from, even from my own paper that I'm working on. But first to Esther, I got this feeling about your methodology that you seemed to have quickly jumped to some kind of findings, some kind of conclusions, I don't know, before you're able to dovetail into the data itself, and the data should be able to show some clarity on the direction of your study. So I think you might need to reflect on that and ensure that probably you don't quickly jump into conclusions without thinking about what the data says. That's what I got. I might not have been probably able to pick exactly what you're trying to do, but that's a feeling I got. And then, of course, my colleague Habib has talked about the issue of positionality, given that you contested, but that probably may in one way or another influence how you want this study to pan out at the end of the day. So I think that might be very important for you as well. For Sylvia, I must say I'm excited personally about this topic, given that I'm a victim of a confrontation between media and the military, and I'll be very excited to read your work personally. However, again, I also have something around your methodology as well. You seem to be focusing the study on secondary data, and if I were in your position, I would also think about primary data related to the 2026 election and to see how those concepts that you excellently bring out might have had something to show to us, especially with the experience of this election in particular. How would you think you would want to bring that out? Probably maybe look at the methodology itself and see whether you might want to deploy some key interviews or some any other tools that would collect some primary data for you, so that then you have some comprehensive picture related to this election itself. How I would want to see how it played out, how your analysis actually plays out using primary data from this election. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We have time for one or two quick questions. If there aren't, I will invite the authors to respond to the questions. Baguma, I see you unmuting yourself. Is that a question or a comment?
Good afternoon, colleagues, and Dr. Sewa Chirianga. I want to thank the presenters. First, I start with the Ms. Twendi. I had put in the group a few things for her to look at, specifically the issue of participation from a legal perspective, because participation may look similar to engagement, but may not be synonymous, or the other way around. We see a development in Kenya where they're trying to enforce their constitutional provisions on public participation, and they have a participation bill. So I thought that you would have at least a study on see how we can benchmark that in her recommendation to have a public participation bill for Uganda to enforce Article 38 of the Constitution. And I also referred her to do some case review. The High Court, the Constitutional Court, and the Supreme Court have very good decisions dealing with this question of participation. Now, our problem would be justiciability and enforceability of those provisions of the law. There's also a good reading if she does comparative studies on case law in South Africa and the case law in Kenya. I see some good things there, so I had made reference to that for her. And also the facilitative rights, rights like access to information, which is important during elections. And in Uganda, you know, access to information is a problem. I also talked about other facilitative rights that are provided in Article 29, some rights and freedoms like association, demonstration, and all these. Since she's talking about elections, I also referred her to look at the policy framework for youth, the National Youth Policy. There are good things to look at there. I recommended that she touches on vital statistics for the youth agenda in the country. And also the institutional framework for youth is very robust, right away from the village to parliament. And they have a council and all these things. For Dr. Sylvia Namwase, my senior, I had intimated here in the box, but I think I seem to have exceeded what I'm supposed to type in, so it has failed to come through. But basically, I was saying, I looked at a definition on Google for militarization, and it was saying it's an action or process of equipping or supplying a place, organization, etc., with soldiers and other military resources. In that regard, I had urged that the Chiboko squad, for example, they were aided by the security forces to go and meet violence on people on Kampala Road. That could be looked at militarization of elections in Uganda. I was looking at the emergence of the faceless gangs in this country. You have people wearing uniforms, but they cannot be identified. It is difficult to tell whether they are police or soldiers. You saw the blame game, people maintaining a complete deniability that they do not know them. There is that to look at. I had also talked about this muchaka culture. You see people like recently in the Zimbabwe and Kasambia, civilians all of a sudden pulling out guns on each other. That is also a form of militarization. I don't know how a doctor is going to look at that. And before I forget, I had also mentioned a bit about good lines in the Major General Tinyefuza case, the decision. There are good lines about the role of the military and the politics. So if politics is to be associated with elections, there are good lines there that doctor could pick from there. Lastly, the dynastic culture that is building. Like Uganda, we seem to accept it. You remember President Museveni, those of us who are 50 now, when Muhoozi joined, he said, my son is not a soldier, he's just an LDU. Today he's an army commander who is influencing politics and elections, and you have seen how he has actually asserted himself with the forces on ground. I was saying that those of you who will be there, because me, I'm 50, I do not know whether that future will still be around. You saw how Muhoozi was celebrating the son joining the military. So since there is that culture that has been building in the dynasty of the Kagutas, we cannot rule out the future that is going to have a Muzukuru in charge of this country, in charge of the forces, maintaining the culture that he has grown around seeing the father do and the grandfather. I thank you. I could end it at that. And a very good afternoon to my brother, Karamagi Andre.
Thank you very much. Dr. Moses Kisa, you're welcome.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to CBR and to Richard for convening this seminar. I will make some general comments. I really don't have questions to ask. The first comment to both authors is to think about really what research question you're trying to answer. When I read both abstracts, I couldn't figure out what the abstract was trying to answer. What's the question? What's the research question? That's always the starting point that anybody would advise you in this business. At least that's what I advise students. Begin by asking a question, which leads me to comment that both abstracts and presentations are overly broad. Which is good, it's good to start from a broad perspective, and both topics are incredibly important. Both authors are dealing with two critical themes in Uganda's electoral politics, so that's great. But Esther, if I may specifically speak, start with you. I mean, youth and politics is such a broad field. And there's so much that has already been written on, youth in Ugandan politics. There's so much that we know. A lot of what you are outlining there is stuff that we all know very, very well, which need not to be rehashed. And so you need to ask yourself, what is it really that you want to study about youth and politics, particularly in 2026 elections? And I think Adnaito Rugendo did allude to something useful for you to consider, and for Sylvia as well. Really do focus on the 2026 elections and investigate what role the youth, will have played or are playing in the campaign and electioneering processes, and what is making their role or influence possible or not possible. In other words, you really need to be very pointed and specific on what you are investigating. I'm really not a fan of, studies that speak in general terms of opportunities and challenges. That language, I'm sorry to say, is not very helpful in a rigorous research investigation. So I would strongly advise you to drop the notion of opportunities and challenges, because those can be countless, innumerable. Instead, pick on an issue. I mean, you mentioned, for example, the digital sphere, or the digital square that many young people are very much into, and so is digitalization and the digital tools going to be the avenue through which Ugandan youth play a consequential role in the 2026 elections, or is it something else? In other words, what's really the channel, the entry point through which you are conceptualizing and analyzing the youth factor in the 2026 elections? I think that's really my suggestion for you to think about and consider. And then in the same vein, Sylvie, the issue of the military in Ugandan politics is incredibly important and a very large subject to deal with. When I listened to you speak, you basically outlined what would be like a 3-volume book project, not a journal article, a working paper. There's just simply too much that you are proposing to take on, and I can see that you'll not be able to actually do all that because it's just too much. And I would think that you really need to leave the issue of the military and politics in Uganda, because that is, that of course is also overstudied. There's so much that we know, but it's just too broad and too expansive to take on. So your interest, I imagine, is really in studying the military in Uganda's elections. And here we're talking about 2026 elections specifically, but I think what you can, rather than go back into the deep history of colonial and immediate post-colonial political and military intersections, I would propose that you instead map the military's role in elections under Museveni. So you can begin with 1996 and see and sort of map the trajectories and trends. But specifically, again, to Rugendo's point, I think it would be helpful if you can carefully study what is it that the military are going to be doing in the 2026 elections. Will the role of the security forces in next year's elections represent aspects of continuity as we have known from the beginning of the current rulership? Or is there going to be some break and sort of some new directions that you can tease out? So again, I think that it's better you take a more pointed and precise approach to investigating this. The broad civil military relations and the role of the military in politics is I think something that you could put aside for another project. For purposes of this, I think that it's better you study the legal and institutional dimensions of the military's role in next year's elections. And I think your scholarly interest is in studying the intersection of the law and politics and of course the military's role in elections. And so I would say that rather than focus on the bigger picture from the past, think about the more recent past, but specifically with regard to electioneering and electoral processes and outcomes, and study carefully what we are likely to observe and what does that mean for. And then of course you can make broad conclusions and implications about the trajectory of Uganda's political landscape and the role of the armed forces in shaping what we see. Okay, those are my broad comments and suggestions, and obviously take them for what they are worth, and you can as well not take them if you think they are not worth taking. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Kisa. We'll now revert to the authors to share responses. Let's start with the first presenter, Ms. Tuende. you're welcome to respond, and then we will end with the great Dr. Namwase. Ms. Esther, the floor is yours. If you are speaking, you are still muted.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Colleagues, I'm very grateful for your comments and for your guidance and and concerns regarding my paper. I'll start with Andrew. You said, why are the youth? We are so many, we are the majority, but the youth are treated as minority almost in all scholarly work or literature that we have. This is true. Actually, in Uganda, the youths are among the special interest groups. And the question is why, when we are the majority? Look at out of the 500 plus MPs, only 5 seats are reserved for the youth. Many times, I think we are left out. The youth are left out in decision-making process when it comes to key critical areas of the parties or in government. Many times the youth, I think, are being left out, and that's why maybe all the literature that is available refer to the youth as the minority. I'll still study this and see why, and maybe I can also concentrate on it in my paper. You talked of the legal restrictions. I think there is no legal restrictions for the youth. All spaces are open for the youth to participate, from national level to the local level. So there's no legal restriction for the youth to participate or to engage in politics. But the reason why are they still limited? Why are they still left out? I think that's why this paper is all about. You talked of us, I mean the youth having the will to participate. Do we have the will? Yes, they have the will. I don't know whether I'm already, just like Mr. Regenda said, I am already I dumped in the findings, but do they have the will? Look at the 2026 elections that are already running. We can see the youth participating already, being elected, and also participating in the elections of the primaries for different political parties. They have contested, they have won. The youth have beaten ministers in primaries. So when it comes to the will, I want to assure you, Andrew, that the youth have the will to participate in this election or in the politics of Uganda. Mr. Regendo, thank you for your comment. You said I already dumped into findings and conclusions. Thank you so much. Maybe because I went through it, and maybe I was presenting, it was something so personal, but with your guidance, I'll have to do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Waguma, for your concerns and for the guidance. I'm very grateful. I will go and look at the National Youth Policy, and I will also study the agencies of Kenya, South Africa. I'm also going to look at all that data as you've guided, and I'm so grateful. Oh, Mr. Moses, thank you so much. Concerning the language of the themes of opportunities, challenges. Yeah, that's why I'm here to present, so that you guide me on which to use. Still, I'll go and make studies and see which proper language to use, and also which research questions to concentrate on. Instead of being broader, I do zero down so that I make the right thing as you guided. Thank you. Over to you, Andrew. I'm grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Richard, do you have any input before we switch to the final comments from Sylvie?
You know, Andrew, you excite me. We are two Richards here. There is a Dr. Richard and an ordinary Richard here.
Sewachirianga. Although, just to say, I think you wanted to share something with Sylvie on WhatsApp. So you requested for their number, or with Esther. Okay. There being no comments from Mr. Sewachirianga, let me invite Sylvie to respond to the questions that were posed to her.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, friends, for your comments. I've heard from 4 of you, and I want to group my response because your comments are somewhat interrelated. I want to address Andrew's comment with Mr. Kisa's comment. Quite lengthy guidance and comment around how broad the paper is. And the questions that you asked, Andrew, are, I think, those very broad philosophical, theoretical questions. For instance, very specifically for me, you pointed out the fact that we're adopting certain concepts uncritically, like civil-military relations. And you highlighted the issue of how in other countries, some of these, the armies are actual institutions, which is not the case in Uganda. Yes, and of course you pointed to Huntington's book on the professional soldier. And it is indeed true that there is that recognition of the classical civil-military, civil-military relations in the classical sense, where you have objective militarization and that's exist in a context where we have an actual professional army, and civil military relations can operate in the classical sense. But at the same time, we have the subjective approach or concept of civil military relations, where here the quote unquote civilian or political class is actually controlling the army and using it for its own political goals, which by and large is arguably what obtains in Uganda. Now, those are very important questions that you asked. Now, to the dilemma that I'm facing, which maybe is not so much of a dilemma if I reflect more on Mr. Kisa's guidance, is that we can make the paper more slender than it is at the moment, because right now, as he rightly pointed out, I've started from very broad strokes with the understanding that ultimately I'll have to zero in. Now, all of those issues are actually by and large important background and contextual issues, like the question of what type of civil military relations actually obtains in Uganda, which actually then speaks to even the question by Habib, that am I looking at military in politics or military in elections, which was also Mr. Kisa's concern. Are you looking at military in politics and such that you go into the whole history and the context of the militarization of politics in Uganda generally, which initially I felt that in structuring my paper, I need to give that context. Especially if I'm applying the critical legal school. For me, I'm also thinking about my audience and the fact that in my observations, the Ugandan legal scholarship tends to be more positivist. And so if I'm drawing upon the critical legal school, I need to add some additional, I feel a sense of the need to put some additional effort in explaining myself. And a lot of the critical school draws its critique or grounds itself in actually the political context, the historical context of things, the broader theoretical context of things. And so you find yourself actually needing to really set the context properly for a legal audience that has been more used to positivist approaches. And this is just also my own ideological conviction that I no longer want to approach law from a positivist lens, because I think the country, it can no longer, the law is not responsive in black letter. So you need, I think, a new ethos. And this is part of my effort to try and have publications in law that are adopting a more critical ethos. So it's both an ideological thing and it's also a strategic thing. But I take the Professor Kisai's guidance, because also I'm wary about the space and the size of the paper, and I know most journals have a word limit. So I guess in the end, it will be about me balancing how much I can say in terms of the context and the background, and I focus on the question rightly pointed to me by Professor Kisa, that you just zoom in on the military and elections, and then I map the military's role in elections, you know, from 2006 to date. And then here is where I will come to Mr. Arinaitwe's advice to get some very specific perspective on 2026, which I also rightly take, I accept, because also I want to be forward-looking. So initially the conceptualizations was very doctrinal in terms of methodology, but you're right, because a lot of this information about, you know, that the SFC has been deployed, I need, I guess, some actual insights into actual respondents on the ground in terms of what that means. So I could incorporate 1 or 2 or 3 interviews in here to augment the doctrinal approach. And then to Mr. And so with that response, I think I have addressed I've addressed Andrew's comment, Mr. Arinaitwe's proposals, and then also Professor Kisa's guidance. And also Habib's question about whether I'm looking at military in politics or military in elections. And then now to the comments by Mr. Ratoro. I think that actually these are also very, very helpful. In my paper, I do recognize I forgot a section where I needed to define actually militarization and contextualized it in Uganda. But I do mention in my paper actually these paramilitary entities, more so drawing upon Rebecca Tapscott's theory of arbitrary states, and how it is deliberate that the government actually deploys all of these unidentifiable entities that can then mete out violence. So it's its own flavor of militarization. So so thank you for this comment, because it means as I define militarization, as you got it from the definition you said you had Googled. In many ways, there are variations of militarization, but by and large, what you provided is what it is. But also, there are manifestations in Uganda that are very specific to our context. So these paramilitaries, the Chiboko squads, the Mchakas, and these masked people that you can't place, is part of the deliberate architecture that Rebecca Tapscott calls the arbitrary state, and actually how then the state is able to mete out unaccountable violence, because then it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle of it can mete out violence, but then it can't account for it by saying it was not us who did it, and then the law suddenly becomes, impotent, because for the law to prosecute, it needs to know who did it, and then prosecute. But the government has mastered that skill of hybridity, of ambiguity, and so yes, I will definitely delve into that. And so I think with that I have responded to your questions. I thank you so much for the questions and comments. It's going to help me a lot in how I'm going to structure the paper more specifically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Receive your flowers, Esther and Sylvie. I will return the mic to the host, who's Richard Sachiyanga, to see us off.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think this has been very insightful, very engaging. Thank you to the two authors for sharing their thoughts. As usual, we shall share with you a recording of this so that you can use it to improve the papers. Next Thursday, we shall now have another cohort of speakers, and we see how to proceed with this. We certainly look forward to the next iteration of these papers, and also we hope you also make time to be there to listen to the other authors of these papers. So once again, all of you, we want to thank you very much, and to our colleagues on the editorial team, Professor Kisa and others, thank you for also being here. I think this is all for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you, colleagues.